A Category 2 hurricane is not supposed to be one of the deadliest storms in Atlantic history. Category 5 storms get the documentaries. Category 2 storms get a paragraph on Wikipedia, if that. But in September 1974, a Category 2 hurricane killed more people than almost every Category 4 and Category 5 storm ever recorded, over 8,000 dead, in a country most Americans couldn't find on a map. Its name was Fifi. And it's the only Category 2 hurricane in history whose name was ever retired. This is the storm that broke the rule that wind speed equals danger. Every hurricane starts the same way as a tropical wave, a ripple of low pressure drifting off the coast of Africa. Fifi's began on September 8, 1974. By September 14, it had organized into a tropical depression over the Caribbean. 2 days later, a tropical storm. On September 17, a hurricane. None of that was unusual. What happened next is the part that matters. On September 18, Fifi reached its peak intensity, 110 mile-per-hour sustained winds, a central pressure of 971 millibars. That's a Category 2 strong, but nowhere close to the ceiling. For comparison, a Category 5 storm can exceed 157 miles per hour. Fifi never got within 47 miles per hour of that number. By hurricane classification, this was a moderate storm. Not the kind meteorologists sound alarms about, not the kind that makes international news before it hits. Fifi brushed the northern coast of Honduras that same day, then continued on toward Belize, where it made its confirmed landfall on September 19 at around 105 miles per hour, a storm that was, if anything, weakening slightly as it approached land. On paper, this looked like a survivable hurricane. Honduras had weathered stronger storms before. There was no reason, based on wind speed alone, to expect what was about to happen in the mountains. That's the trap. Wind speed measures a hurricane's power. It does not measure what a hurricane can do to the ground underneath it, and Fifi was about to prove that the hard way. Here's what the wind speed number couldn't tell you. Fifi had slowed down. A hurricane that stalls over land doesn't just linger, it concentrates. Instead of spreading its rainfall across a wide track at speed, it dumps that rainfall onto the same patch of ground for hour after hour after hour. And the ground it chose was northern Honduras, steep, mountainous, already saturated from the region's rainy season. Over roughly 36 hours, parts of the interior recorded close to 24 inches of rain. 24 inches. That's 2 feet of water, falling from the sky onto terrain with nowhere flat for it to go. The Choloma River Basin alone recorded an estimated 20 inches 510 millimeters in that same window. Picture it this way. That's the equivalent of dropping an entire year's worth of rain for some cities onto one river valley in a day and a half. Water doesn't spread out evenly on a mountainside. It funnels. It finds the lowest points, the narrowest channels, and it moves faster and faster as more of it arrives behind it. The Ula River Valley, downstream of all that mountain rainfall, flooded into what witnesses and later reports described as a temporary lake roughly 20 miles wide. 20 miles of what used to be farmland, roads and villages, now underwater. If a storm like this one that kills through rain and geography instead of wind sounds like something worth understanding better, subscribe now, because it gets much worse from here. And upstream, in the mountains above one particular town, all of that water was about to meet an obstacle nobody had built, and nobody was watching. Above the town of Choloma population, roughly 7,000, the relentless rain triggered a landslide. That landslide slid directly into the river channel above the town, blocking it. In an instant, without a single engineer involved, without a single inspection, Choloma had a dam sitting above it. An earthen wall of collapsed hillside, holding back a river that was still rising. A concrete bridge further upstream failed around the same time, adding to the chaos of debris and water already building behind the blockage. No one in Choloma knew this dam existed. There was no monitoring station on it. No engineer calculating how much pressure it could hold. No warning siren wired to detect the moment it gave way. Sometime between the night of September 19 and the early hours of September 20th, 1974, it failed. Everything that had been building up behind that accidental dam days of mountain rainfall, an entire blocked river was released at once, directly down the valley, directly onto a town that was asleep. There was no evacuation order, because there was no one positioned to give one. Residents reported the water arriving with almost no warning at all, not as a rising flood people could watch and respond to, but as a wall that was simply, suddenly, there, in the space of one night, 182 villages and towns across the region were reported destroyed. Choloma took the worst of it directly. A landslide nobody engineered. A dam nobody inspected. A collapse nobody predicted. That is the exact combination of failures that turned a Category 2 storm into a mass casualty event, and Choloma was where all three converged. When the water receded, The counting began, and it never fully resolved. Chaloma's death toll alone is disputed across sources. Some put it at roughly 2,300, others as high as 2,800 to 5,000. In a town of around 7,000 people, even the lower estimate means close to a third of the entire population was killed in a single night. The higher estimate would mean closer to two-thirds. There is no way to state an exact number. Record-keeping in the chaos of the disaster simply could not keep pace with what had happened. By around September 24, 4 days after the flood, an estimated 5,000 to 6,000 bodies had already been burned rather than buried. That decision wasn't about disrespect, it was about disease. In tropical heat, with clean water and medical infrastructure gone, burying that many bodies fast enough to prevent an epidemic simply wasn't possible. Burning was the only option that could move fast enough. At the same time, more than 350,000 people were reported living in emergency shelters. Estimates of how many people were left completely homeless range from roughly 150,000 up to as high as 500,000, depending on the source, a gap that tells you as much about the scale of the chaos as any single number could. Over 10,000 homes were destroyed. Total damage is most commonly cited at $1.8 billion in 1974 dollars, for a country the size of Honduras. That's the kind of number that doesn't just damage an economy, it can reset one. Roughly half of the country's food crops were wiped out. An estimated 95% of the banana crop was destroyed, and bananas alone represented close to half of Honduras's entire export revenue at the time. Honduras didn't just lose homes and lives. It lost the ability to feed and fund itself in the same 48 hours. Help arrived, but slowly, and against terrain that fought back at every step. The United States delivered an estimated £1.8 million of relief supplies within the first month. Canada sent Royal Canadian Air Force Hercules aircraft 436 Squadron, beginning September 27, 1974, under what Canadian defense records call Operation Honduras, 1974. Reconstruction moved slowly. Reports describe a 6-village housing project intended to deliver nearly 1,200 homes by 1977, alongside a $15 million reconstruction loan and a $5 million plan to restart agriculture. Numbers that, set against $1.8 billion in damage, tell you how long the recovery actually took. And then there's the detail that outlasted everything else. At the end of the 1974 Atlantic hurricane season, the name Fifi was retired, permanently removed from the naming list, never to be used again. That alone wouldn't be unusual. Names get retired after deadly storms regularly. What makes Fifi different is the category attached to it. Every other hurricane name ever retired up to that point belonged to a Category 4 or Category 5 storm, the strongest classification that exists. Fifi was the first Category 2 hurricane in history to have its name retired. That means you can look at the entire list of history's most catastrophic hurricanes and find exactly one storm on it that never even reached the top half of the wind speed scale, and it's sitting there because of a death toll that Category 5 monsters would envy. Hurricane categories measure wind. They have never measured rain, and they have never measured what happens when rain meets a mountainside with nowhere to drain. Modern hurricanes still kill this way. Rainfall and inland flooding, not wind, are responsible for the majority of hurricane deaths in the decades since Fifi, in country after country, storm after storm. Fifi didn't just kill more than 8,000 people. It exposed a blind spot in how the world measures hurricane danger, a blind spot that, in various forms, still exists today. The storm that redefined how dangerous a hurricane can be still doesn't have a name most people recognize.